Hey true crime besties, welcome back to an all-new episode of SERIALously. Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of SERIALously with me, Annie Elise. We are talking all things true crime today. Well, actually, that's a lie. That is a bold-faced lie. We're not talking all things true crime today. We're talking about one specific thing, true crime today, because we are doing a mega deep dive. Now, I will say this case is relatively recent, so there are maybe things that will trickle out over the next month or two. I don't imagine that it will, but possible because it is more of a recent case. But it's one that a lot of you guys have been requesting. So I decided we're not going to wait. We're just going to go ahead. We're going to jump in and cover it. And I think the one thing that's really creepy, especially when it comes to true crime cases, is the way that some of these absolute monsters can honestly just blend right in. They can act totally normal, totally safe, like these harmless people just, going about their lives. And you would never in a million years suspect that they are capable of something so intense and so crazy. But then it's like something horrendous or barbaric happens, and you go back and you ask yourself, like, how did we miss the signs? How did we not see this? What else just kind of flew over our head? Like, what are we missing here? So I want you to keep that in mind as we get into today's case. And I hate to throw it back to this, but almost like Ted Bundy in a way, right? Nobody really ever suspected that this handsome, charming guy was capable of doing what he did. He also worked at a self-harm prevention hotline, like all of these things. And then when you look back, you're like, oh, okay, the writing was on the wall in certain things with certain behaviors. But I just want you to keep that in mind as we get into today's case. So let's jump right in.
Pete, what's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do.
You broke into her house and you shot her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times.
If they haven't already, your boys will realize that their father doesn't love them.
On February 23rd, 2023, in Quincy, Illinois, William Posso went to visit his 41-year-old daughter, Becky Bliefnick. He had just received a phone call from her husband, well, sort of ex-husband, I should say, named Tim. He had said that Becky had forgotten to pick up their 3 boys from school. Now, the reason I'm calling him her sort of ex-husband is because Becky and Tim were in the process of a divorce. It was almost settled, literally just a few days away from being done, but they were still technically married, so it was still her husband. But anyway, Tim had tried to call Becky, but he couldn't reach her. So then Tim went to go get the kids from school and asked William to check on Becky to make sure that she was okay and that everything was all right. But what William found would stay with him for the rest of his life. His daughter was there, dead on the bathroom floor, with blood pooled around her and bullet holes just riddling her body. He called 911 and officers immediately arrived to investigate. They declared her dead on the scene, and they also determined pretty quickly that she had been dead for hours. Now, right away, it was clear that somebody had broken into her home. Thankfully, Becky's sons were staying with their dad, so they didn't have to witness anything that happened during that night. I mean, God forbid if they were in that house, who knows how many victims there would be. So anyway, on the second floor of the house, in one of Becky's sons' rooms, there was a window that had clearly been tampered with. There were marks that suggested that somebody had used a tool of some sort, almost like a crowbar, to try and pry it open. There was also a shoe print that was not too far away from the window, so, clearly whoever had forced it open had either come in or had gone out that way. Probably in, which we'll get into in a minute. In fact, outside, directly underneath the window, investigators also found a lawn chair that had been dragged over from somewhere else in the yard, almost like somebody needed to get a boost, right? So the thought was that somebody climbed on top of that chair to then get into the window. Then they forced it open, went inside, and attacked Becky. She was in the bathroom that connected to her bedroom, and she had been shot, get this, 14 times. Talk about overkill, right? She was shot 9 times in her chest, 3 times in her right arm, and once in her left hand. And surrounding her body on the floor were 8 9mm shell casings. And the investigators also found some very strange small pieces of white, yellow, and pink plastic on the bedroom floor. Now, as for Becky's cause of death, I mean, yes, she had been shot. That was clear enough from all of the bullet casings and from the multiple gunshot wounds. But none of these gunshot wounds were immediately fatal. Instead, she got hit, once in the lung and then another time in the spinal cord, and that paralyzed her. But it's not what killed her. For several minutes afterward, she suffered and bled before she finally died. Which I can't even begin to imagine how utterly horrific that would be. I mean, I guess thank goodness in the sense that you're paralyzed and you wouldn't be able to feel it, but the fact that you're paralyzed and you can't move and you know that you're literally dying on your bathroom floor and your sons aren't there and you're trying to like grapple with it, like it's a whole different kind of torture, okay? Now, the police couldn't find any fingerprints or foreign DNA, but they did find a little bit under Becky's fingernails. So it seemed like she had scratched her attacker. But all that the investigators could tell at first was that this DNA underneath her fingernail belonged to a male. Now, based on where her body and her phone were found, the investigators theorized that Becky was in her bedroom when the intruder just suddenly burst in. She tried to call 911 then while running to her bathroom, but she dropped the phone after she was shot. So they thought that she fell in the bathroom and then while she was on the ground, unable to fight back or get away any further, her killer shot her several more times, just, again, overkill. They believed that Becky had been killed around 1:11 a.m. that same day on February 23rd, and they based that conclusion on her phone records, because they saw in her call log that she had tried to call 911 around this same time, but instead, she hit 91126. They also discovered that Becky's security system showed that the front door opened a minute later at 1:12 a.m. Now, presumably, that was the killer leaving. And also, they didn't close that door behind them because later on, a neighbor noticed that Becky's front door was just wide open. Obviously, that was very weird in and of itself. Becky didn't usually leave her door just hanging open like that, but the neighbor apparently wasn't quite worried enough to call the police or to report what they had seen, not until after it was too late. Unfortunately, Becky didn't have any security cameras in her home. However, thankfully, her neighbors did. And this is kind of like Chris Watts. Remember when they didn't have any cameras, but then the neighbor did, and that's what really blew the whole case wide open? So in the past year, their cars had been broken into, so they decided to install these cameras and set them up so that they were pointed at the driveway. And of course, just past the driveway, Becky's house was visible. Now, the camera didn't catch anything from the night of the murder. However, it did find something the day before the murder happened. On February 22nd, around 1:05 a.m., a person walked along the side of Becky's house, right toward the backyard. Then, about 50 minutes later, someone, presumably the same person, was walking back in the opposite direction. Now, the neighbors actually did notice this footage right away, and it set off huge alarm bells. They knew that it was weird, so they decided to text Becky and tell her what they had seen. She replied that she had already been nervous even before she got their text messages, because she noticed that her motion detector lights had gone off. She also said that she had heard something that she thought sounded like a man's voice. And understandably, she was pretty freaked out and scared by all of this. Now, what the neighbors missed, but the police later learned, was that a week earlier to that, on February 14th, in the middle of the night, almost around the exact same time that the other thing happened, somebody had also walked along the side of Becky's house towards the backyard, and then they walked back toward the front an hour later. Seems like somebody was casing it, right? A pattern. Every week, somebody's going there, walking to the backyard, and then walking back out. I mean, it's weird. Now, there was a bus barn not too far from Becky's house, which is literally a barn for buses. I know it's a weird term. I never had heard of it until I was researching this case, but that's what it is. It's a barn for buses. It's where they store the school buses overnight when they're not out, driving kids around, and you can see all of that here. Now, this bus barn had security cameras too, and on both nights, February 14th and February 22nd, they filmed somebody riding a bike toward Becky's house, then coming back in the opposite direction about an hour later. So definitely consistent with the person also walking into the backyard and walking an hour later, right? They're starting to track the movements. The police couldn't tell what type of bike it was or even what color it was, but all they could say for sure was that it didn't have any reflectors on it, which also is very dangerous. To be riding a bike at night or in the middle of the night without any reflectors, that is incredibly dangerous. But it also indicates that somebody wanted to go undetected. right? Now, they also noted that it was weird for someone in general to be out riding a bike at that time because not only was it around midnight, but it was really cold in Illinois at the time. I mean, we're talking mid-February, which is very much the dead of winter. Now, unfortunately, the security footage from both the neighbor's house and that bus barn was very bad quality. The investigators couldn't tell what this person looked like, whether they were a man, a woman, nothing. But it did look like it was the same person in all of these videos. Now, going back to Becky's phone records for a minute, the police saw that one of the very last text messages that Becky ever sent was to her boyfriend, Ted Johnson. And again, even though Becky was technically married, the marriage was, all but over and she was dating again. The divorce was only going to be a couple of days away, so it wasn't really all that shocking that she had a new boyfriend. But you also know that in any kinds of situations like this, whether it's a murder, an investigation, a kidnapping, abduction, whatever it is, you always start by talking to the partner. Always, always, always. So the police talked to Ted, and he said that he last saw Becky 2 days before the murder. This was on February 21st. Now see, earlier that week, Becky had needed to get surgery, and she was still recovering that night. So that day, on the 21st, he had picked up some food for her so that she wouldn't need to cook. Also, so she wouldn't have to mess around dealing with delivery apps. He was just being a kind guy. I'll bring you over some food, you just chill, just rest, just recovered. So he then dropped off the food for her to eat. He stayed at her house for about an hour afterward, and he helped her carry some water bottles, some books upstairs to her bedroom so that she could read in bed, have her water, and again, just be comfortable. He also made sure that she got safely put into bed. He pulled the covers over her, and he told her, sleep well, gave her a kiss, and then he left. They then continued to text each other on the evening of February 22nd. They talked about bills, laundry, really just normal everyday stuff. She told him that she was really excited too because the doctors told her that she was going to be well enough to drive the following day. So she was finally getting a little bit of her independence back. She was finally going to be able to drive and go and run errands and just get outside and maybe go pick up the boys like she was planning to do, things like that. She told him that she was feeling a little bit sore, but that overall she was doing well. So the next morning, Ted sent her a good morning text. A few hours later, he sent her another one saying, hey, I hope you slept well. And then hours later, after not receiving any reply to his text messages, he texted her with Marco, kind of a little playful way of hello, you there? Are you there? Kind of, Marco Polo, the game. So he was hoping that she would reply with Polo. But that reply never came. So during that day, Ted drove to a town in Missouri to discuss some issues related to his own divorce. Like Becky, Ted was also going through a divorce, and he and his ex had to work out some custody arrangements. So he was going there to deal with the situation in person, so he ended up having an alibi for the day before Becky was shot and murdered. That night, a coworker also came over for about an hour and a half, but they eventually left. Ted went to sleep, and then he went to work around 7 a.m. the next day. When he was done with his shift, he then went to his parents' house to feed some horses. So this is all part of his timeline, his alibi, his whereabouts. The police questioned him about everything, about his whereabouts, about his relationship, about, all of the details. And when they did, they learned that Becky had been storing a backpack with $13,000 in cash at Ted's house, inside his safe. Ted knew about the backpack. He knew that it had cash in it, but he didn't know the exact amount. He also said that he didn't know exactly why Becky was storing money at his house. But naturally, the police were investigating, and they wanted to know about all of the different motives that people might have had to commit a murder. For example, was Ted jealous? Had he and Becky gotten into a fight? Was he maybe hoping to get his hands on some of that $13,000 in cash, which, FYI, it's not a small amount of money. But Ted told the officers that he had no idea that Becky was even dead until Becky's sister sent him a Facebook message on the night of February 23rd to tell him, which I can't even imagine hearing news like that over Facebook Messenger, but maybe she didn't have his number. Obviously I'm sure she didn't have his number, but talk about impersonal. Well, even though Ted's story checked out overall, the police still decided that they wanted to test his hands for gunpowder residue. Luckily, it ended up being negative. They also took his shoes to compare to the print that they had found in Becky's bedroom, but it wasn't a match. And on top of that, there was really no evidence at the crime scene linking Ted to this murder. He also didn't really have a motive. Remember, he didn't even know how much cash Becky had stored in his safe. So because of that, how could he be tempted when he might have thought it was just a small, inconsequential amount? How are you going to plan this whole murder plot over an amount you don't even know that exists, right? So after checking all of it out and making sure that everything he said was true and that all of his alibi and detail checked out, the police ruled Ted out as a suspect, So this meant that the investigators had to go back to the drawing board in terms of trying to find a suspect and figure out who murdered Becky and murdered her in such an overkill, disgusting way. Except then, suddenly, Becky's friends and family told the police they had no doubt in their mind about who the murderer was and who did this to Becky. Okay, so there are some things in life that I feel like are totally fine leaving up to chance. Maybe you're trying a new restaurant and you're going to give it a whirl and maybe it ends up becoming your new favorite. Or you impulsively, if you're like me, buy something on TikTok Shop and you only spent $10, so it's not a total waste if it ends up being, not great. But you know what shouldn't be a total crapshoot? Finding the right doctor. And that is where Zocdoc comes in. Zocdoc is a free app and website that makes finding a doctor so easy. You can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors across every specialty, whether it's mental health, dental care, eye care, even skin care. And here's the part that I love. You can filter for doctors who take your insurance, who are nearby, and who are highly rated by verified patients. No more guessing or endless calls to see if they take your insurance. Plus, Zocdoc shows you their actual appointment openings, so you can pick a time that works for you and book instantly. Seriously, appointments are fast. Most of them happen within 24 to 72 hours, and you can sometimes even get same-day visits. So honestly, I use Zocdoc myself. My brother was just telling me the other night he uses it too, and it has made booking doctor's appointments so much less stressful. You're not stuck scrolling through outdated directories or waiting weeks to get seen. You just click, book, and get it done. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and check out Zocdoc.com/AnnieElise to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/AnnieElise. One more time, Zocdoc.com/AnnieElise. Go get it done. Becky's death really shocked the community of Quincy, Illinois. Quincy is a small city along the Mississippi River with a population of about 40,000 people, and Becky had lived there her entire life. She was born there on November 19, 1981. She graduated from Quincy Notre Dame High School, and she was the valedictorian of her graduating class. She was described as the perfect girl-next-door type of person. She was pretty, she was blonde, athletic, and smart. And she even stayed in Quincy for college as well. Specifically, she went to Quincy University where she kept getting those good grades, and she was also a very successful athlete. She played on the tennis team, and she majored in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry. I mean, talk about smart. She even graduated cum laude. Now, when she was in college, she met her eventual husband, Tim Bliefnick. Tim was also an athlete. He was a linebacker on the football team. And he actually earned a bunch of awards and scholarships to pay his way through college. He was also named to the All-Region and All-American football team. Now, Becky and Tim were just friends in college, and they didn't start dating until 2007, which was 2 years after they graduated. But after that, it was like the rest was history. They got married 2 years after that, and in 2009, they ended up having 3 boys together, Deacon, Grayson, and Arlen. Now, a little bit about Becky. Becky worked as a very high-performing sales representative for a drug company, and Tim worked in the recycling industry. Becky briefly quit her job to be a stay-at-home mom, but after a few years, she decided she wanted to go back to school. Now, she was known for her kindness and her generosity, and she also loved helping other people. She was just honestly straight up passionate about it. So when Becky decided to go back to school, there was absolutely no question about what she wanted to study. She wanted a degree in nursing. She wanted to spend her career helping people even more than she already had been. And needless to say, Becky kept on kicking ass and taking names during her second go-around in school. She kept getting good grades. She was just so smart. She didn't even slow down when she got pregnant with her 3rd child during the last year. Becky actually even gave birth during her spring break, so she only ended up missing 1 day of school. Can you believe it? She was truly the type of person who put 100% into everything she did. After her graduation, she worked as a surgery nurse, and she got a job in the emergency room at Blessing Hospital in Quincy. So during COVID, she split her time between Quincy and 2 other hospitals that were all the way over in Missouri. And we all remember, I'm sure, how there was a shortage of doctors and nurses and medical professionals during that time. So Becky really wanted to help people and do her part. I mean, more than her part. So she stepped up in a pretty serious way. And keep in mind, this was all while she was a very hands-on mother to 3 very energetic boys. And she didn't stop there, because then she and Tim got together with 2 other people that they knew so that they could open a CrossFit gym in Quincy. I mean, as if she didn't already have enough on her plate, right? I'm tired just thinking about it. But that still wasn't all. She also volunteered at her son's school. She was organizing various different events for the students and for the teachers. She also volunteered at a nonprofit for animals and a horse stable, which provided therapeutic riding services, which I gotta just wonder, like, I'm tired just talking about it. How did this woman ever even sleep? When did she sleep? She was like super mom, super busy, super worker, super nurse, super all the things. Now, she was also, as you can imagine, very involved in her kids' lives. Every Halloween, she would hand make all of their costumes. One year, she made them Transformers costumes that actually even transformed. And at the beginning of each school year, she would make each kid a custom first day of school poster so that they could take pictures with it. I mean, like a Pinterest mom, right? Becky just loved to make things fun. She also loved to laugh. She loved to just enjoy life. With her friends, she was always there to provide support and help them with anything that they needed. If they were sick or if they ever needed help with their kids, Becky was always the first person to be there and do whatever she could. All of her friends said that Becky just made such a positive impact on their lives, and she always did it with a smile. And I know that that is something that people always say, like, oh, this person was always smiling, they always lit up a room, or they were such a joy, all of these things. But the truth was, Becky was very happy. She always was smiling. Or she was very good at acting happy on the outside, because underneath it all, she was struggling. Her marriage started to fall apart after she had decided to start going to nursing school. And that had always been a dream of Becky's, but Tim apparently was just not supportive. He said that he was worried that it would just stress her out too much, which, fair, she had a lot of stuff on her plate, and I get stressed out just talking about everything that she was doing, but still, it was a dream of hers. It's something that she was passionate about and wanted to do. And a lot of people close to Becky wondered if the true reason why Tim wasn't supportive was because Becky shouldered a lot of the work at home. She did most of the work, taking care of the kids, the cooking, the cleaning, everything. In the meantime, Tim went to work, went to CrossFit classes, and that's about it. But if you asked him, he would say that he was the most hands-on, supportive dad and husband that there ever was. So people started thinking that the real reason that Tim wasn't supportive of her going to nursing school was because he more than likely would need to then take on more responsibility at home. I mean, if she was busy studying and going to class, she might want Tim to step up a little bit with cooking, with cleaning, with giving the kids their baths, all of those things. And from the sound of things, given the choice between doing a little extra work to help Becky pursue her dream or doing nothing and making her give up all of her goals, he preferred the latter. They also felt that Tim liked to control Becky. And with her going to nursing school, he wouldn't be able to do that as much. It would give her a chance to now make more friends, get to know people, feel better about herself, have even more self-confidence. And all of Becky's friends felt like Tim was manipulative, so he was opposed to all of that. Yet, he tried to make it seem like he was only opposed because he was so worried about her stress levels. Now, whatever the truth is, regardless, the point is that Tim didn't want Becky going back to school. But Becky did it anyway. And then things got worse because by 2021, their marriage reached an all-time low. Becky really wanted to try and make things work, though, to save their relationship. She offered to go to marriage counseling. She wanted to work through their problems, get better at communication. But Tim refused. By January of 21, Tim had filed for a divorce. He has never said why exactly he wanted a divorce, but he hinted at the fact that Becky had, quote, changed after going to nursing school. He said her personality wasn't what it used to be, and she now struggled with patience and with managing her stress. But it's like, this woman was a very involved mom to 3 boys while working and volunteering, all the while her husband was going to work and going to the gym. I mean, I think I would struggle with patience and managing my stress if that were me too. I also question if Becky's personality really changed or if it was now the fact that she was kind of her own person. She was excelling in her career. She was gaining confidence. So was it really a personality change, or was he losing control and it was making him insecure? So after Tim filed for a divorce, things got really heated between the two of them. Becky started telling her friends and family that she was worried about Tim's behavior. And in a text message to a friend, Becky even wrote, quote, "He has screamed in my face, shoved me in front of the kids, and has thrown things across the room." In a different text message to a friend, she wrote, "I truly believe Tim has serious mental health problems, and he is becoming more vengeful and unpredictable." But if you were to ask Tim, he would say that Becky was the vengeful one. He said that Becky went around and lied to people, telling them that he had an affair, that he was an alcoholic, all of these horrible things. Tim denied all of this and claimed that Becky was just mad at him because he's the one who filed for divorce. Like she couldn't stand the fact that he was leaving her and moving on. So now, because of that, she was spreading these nasty rumors, trying to get revenge and ruin his reputation. All to say, clearly the divorce was getting very messy. And on top of that, Tim wanted full custody of the kids, and he also wanted the house. Plus, he didn't want to pay child support or alimony. He further argued that Becky was extremely combative and that she would always call him to talk to their youngest son. He also claimed that she would harass him by text messages, just demanding to know where he was, who he was with, where are the children, all sorts of things like that, trying to paint her as becoming unhinged. And once, during a parent-teacher conference night, Becky confronted Tim at the school. She asked him for a letter one of their children had written to both of them. Tim recorded this argument with his cell phone, and we don't have the actual video, but we do have the transcript of what was said. Becky says, "I'm asking for the letter." Tim says, "Stop. I'm asking you to stop harassing me and stop following me." Becky responds, "I'm not harassing you. I'm asking you. I don't want you to tape me. Don't tape me." Tim says, "Then stop doing this." Becky responds, "Don't tape me. I don't." Tim cuts her off and says, "Then stop doing this." She says, "I didn't ask you to tape me." And at one point, Tim filed for a protection order against Becky because he claimed that she was stalking him and harassing him. Now, in the end, the judge ended up not giving Tim the order of protection, but here's where things get really crazy. Becky filed for her own protection order against Tim. She said that Tim would come into her home without permission whenever she was gone, or whenever he had the kids, he would have them go into her house on his behalf and then steal from her without her knowing. After one of these incidents, Becky even called the police. Now, the officer said he couldn't do anything, but that she could, if she wanted, file a restraining order so that she could stop this from happening again. So that's why she filed and asked for one. When she filled out the paperwork to ask for the restraining order, she also said that Tim had threatened it to get rid of the family pet because he wanted to punish Becky. He knew that she loved animals and he knew that that would hurt her. And apparently he thought she wasn't working out enough, so this was his idea of a reasonable punishment for that. As though grown adults need to be punished for not working out in the first place, right? Make it make sense. She also said that he almost hit her and one of their children with a garden hose during one of their heated arguments. According to Becky's filing, Tim scared her. And when they had still lived together, she even refused to sleep in the same room as him because she didn't know what he would do to her during the night. Apparently, one night she straight up told Tim that she was going to sleep in one of the kids' rooms. But then Tim flew into a rage, threw all of her bedding into the basement, and made her sleep down in the basement. Becky claimed that even though Tim hadn't hit her yet, she feared that he would eventually. I mean, after all, he was already abusive in an emotional and psychological way, even if he wasn't physical yet. He loved to manipulate situations in his favor and control everything, according to her. But unfortunately, the judge did not grant Becky an order of protection against him. So she tried a few months later in December, and that's when Becky filed for another order of protection. But this time, it wasn't against Tim. It was against Tim's father, Raymond. Becky claimed in this order that she didn't want her children around Raymond anymore because he had a history of abusing children. Now, I want to be clear, he was never convicted of anything, but apparently it was a known thing in Tim's family. It was one of those cases where everyone was gossiping and everybody knew the deal, but nobody had ever taken any legal action. Multiple relatives had apparently accused Raymond of sexual assault as well. One relative was 22 years old when it happened, while the other two were minors. A fourth relative also claimed that they had witnessed one of these assaults. So in the petition, Becky wrote, quote, "I was beside myself. I could not believe that my children's own father was unwilling to take extra precautions to protect our children from potential abuse. Tim threatened me that if I, quote, outed his father for what he has done, that his dad would probably have to move away, and that he would probably take his own life and it would all be my fault." Apparently, Tim also reportedly told Becky that his father was not a threat to their sons because all of the people who his father ever assaulted were girls, not boys, as though that's such a comforting thought, and that's supposed to make Becky feel a whole lot better. Now, unfortunately, you may be seeing a pattern here, and if you're like me, you're finding it very, very frustrating. Because once again, the judge did not grant this order of protection. Tim's father was still allowed to be around the children, although there were some rules that were put in place to make sure that he was always supervised. So in light of all of this, you can only imagine how stressful and frustrated and really just beaten down Becky felt about this entire divorce process. She just looked extremely exhausted and worn out all the time. And to make matters worse, it took basically forever for this divorce to finally be settled, or I should say more accurately, it was never settled. because she and Tim still hadn't worked out all of the details by the time of her death in 2023. Becky told her friends that it was because Tim had, quote, true mental health problems. Those are her words. She said that she was worried that he would run away with the kids. She also said that she was worried that Tim was going to snap at any moment. And at one point, he even told her, quote, you'll be dead before you get any of my money. Towards the end of her life, Becky sent a friend a Facebook message which said, quote, I'm super nervous for when this ends. If he doesn't get his way, he might literally lose his mind. He wants everything, in all caps. Wants sole custody of the kids, wants all the money, all the assets, wants me to suffer. I'd rather let people believe what he tells them and stay alive for my kids. It sounds crazy to say that out loud, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that he would go off the deep end. I mean, that is a very awful letter to not only have to feel like you're in a position to send, but to receive as somebody's friend. And how many times have we seen that in true crime cases where there's not only, I don't want to call it a cry for help, but almost like foreshadowing what's going to happen. Sometimes people take it seriously, sometimes people don't. But how many times have we covered cases and looked back and said, they reached out, they said, they left it in their diary, if anybody kills me, it's them. They confide in a friend, I'm worried he's going to kill me someday or she's going to kill me someday. It's so scary because sometimes in a lot of these cases, the victims almost know their own fate before it happens. Now, the good news is that by January of 2023, it sounds like Tim was also ready for this entire lengthy divorce process to be done. He sent Becky a proposal where he would have custody of the children 60% of the time, while Becky would get them the other 40% of the time. He also wouldn't pay any child support, and he would give less alimony than he had been during the past 2 years. So all in all, it was just not a good deal. I mean, there was no reason for Becky to accept this. So she rejected it. And she rejected it just a few weeks before that mystery man began showing up on security cameras, casing her house. That man that the police discovered while they were investigating Becky's murder. So guys, I think it's fair to say, I think we can all see where this is going, right? And who might have killed Becky. The police were sure that they knew who killed her too, especially after Becky's sister showed them a text message that Becky had sent a few months before her death. Because the message said, if something ever happens to me, please make sure the number one person of interest is Tim, as that is who would do something to me. I'm putting this in writing that I'm fearful that he will somehow harm me, come after me, or will try to do something that takes me away from the kids or the kids away from me. He has already lied multiple times to paint himself as the victim and me as the perpetrator, when it absolutely is the other way around. No, I have not sent this to mom or dad as I don't want them to be out of their minds with worry. Now again, a very alarming message. And the reason that Becky sent this message was after 2 coworkers of hers died due to domestic dispute situations. She knew that if she died too, there was only one person who could be held responsible. And I think it just goes to show how truly scared of Tim she was. I mean, nobody sends that kind of message unless they truly think there's a threat to their life. But was she right? Was Tim the one responsible for this? So the investigators quickly started looking into Tim. Tim was adamant that he had nothing to do with Becky's death, and he claimed that he was at home with the kids the night that Becky died. However, this alibi of his, it couldn't be confirmed. The detectives were able to search Tim's phone, his computer, his iPad, and his house. And right away, when they did, they found a crowbar in his basement. Now remember, they thought that a crowbar was what the killer had used to pry open that upstairs window. In their search, they also found a multi-tool that looked like it could have been used to open the window as well. And get this, there were also a bunch of pairs of gloves in the house. And I don't mean like one box of gloves that Tim was maybe still hanging on to post-COVID. I mean, there were all kinds of gloves. There were gardening gloves, disposable gloves, reusable gloves, and they were all over the house. Some were in the garage, others were in the trash can. But this was a very big deal because the police, remember, hadn't been able to find any fingerprints in Becky's house. So this told them that whoever the killer was had most likely been wearing gloves. Now, unfortunately, even though the investigators tested multiple pairs of gloves from Tim's house, none of them tested positive for gunshot residue. However, they did find bullets that matched the bullet shells that were found around Becky's body. And on top of that, just like what they had done with Becky's boyfriend Ted, the police got a few pairs of shoes to compare to that footprint that was on the bedroom floor. Now, it ended up not being a match, but I'd say that the rest of the evidence told a fairly compelling story, even without the shoes and the prints matching. The big goldmine, though, in terms of a case against Tim, was when the police looked at his electronics. Because we always say it, the Google history will get you every time, right? And he had hundreds of alarming Google searches. I'm talking things like, can you identify if a shotgun shell was shot out of a specific gun? Or how to open a window from the outside? Also, can I force open my door with a crowbar if I lock myself out? Another one was average Quincy, Illinois police response time. Another, does my Whoop, which is a fitness tracker, record the exact times that I wear it? Another was, can you wash off gunshot residue? Can gunshot residue be washed off? And then one more, how to make a homemade pistol silencer. Now, here's what always gets me every time, okay? These criminals think that they are outsmarting the police, or they're going to outsmart it and get away with murder. So, I'm not going to wear my fitness tracker. I'm going to look up what the exact time is for a police response vehicle to come to the house so that I can time my stuff, my exit more timely, so that I'm going to pull off my tracker so I'm not being tracked. They're so smart. They're trying to get ahead of the game. Yet they're searching all of this shit on Google. It's in your Google history. Are you a moron? Are you a moron? The answer, spoiler alert, is yes. But we are so happy when we see this, right? And I want to focus on that last search of his because it was how to make a homemade pistol silencer. And Tim's computer showed that he read an article that said a plastic grocery bag could be put over a gun and then used as a silencer. And sure enough, investigators found plastic bags from the grocery store Aldi. They were yellow, pink, white, orange, and blue. And in fact, they matched all of those small different colored pieces of plastic that was found in Becky's bedroom. So the police figured that Tim took that advice from this article that he Googled, and he used one of those plastic grocery bags as a silencer. Then, he of course, because he's not very smart, wasn't smart enough to clean up the bits of plastic that flew off of it when the gun went off, right? And I also want to talk about how the neighbors saw someone going into Becky's backyard on February 14th. See, Becky's boyfriend Ted had stayed over at her house that night. It was Valentine's Day, and his truck was parked in her driveway. And that same night, Tim, who must have just been flying off the handles at this point, made over 200 searches online about a specific license plate and VIN number, specifically Ted's information. He searched, how do I find the owner of a license plate? He also even later took it a step further and called the Missouri Department of Records asking for help identifying who owned this car. I mean, talk about going off the rails, right? It definitely looks like you are the one who was very controlling, in my opinion. So much so that you see a truck in the driveway of the woman you're divorcing, who, by the way, you filed for divorce from, and you're flying off the handles wanting to know who owns that truck, everything about this person. Relax, my man. Let it go. These searches started at around 1:10 a.m. on February 14th. And this was just 10 minutes after that person on the bike was seen passing that bus barn. So that tells me that Tim was, of course, outside Becky's house that night, that he saw Ted's truck in her driveway, and he knew that she had somebody over there. I mean, add in the fact that it's Valentine's Day, maybe that's like sticking a knife in the wound or salt in the wound or whatever, but Tim clearly was obsessing over the question of who was at Becky's house. Who was she seeing? Has she moved on? And I mean, it wasn't just this one search that helped the police connect Tim to the man on the bike on these cameras. His phone and his fitness tracker were always disconnected at the times when this person on this bike was showing up on the footage. And I mean, Tim wore this fitness tracker constantly. It was always on. The only reason that he would ever turn it off was because he wanted to make sure that nobody could track him at those particular times. So minutes after the person on the bike was seen passing the bus barn going towards Tim's house, magically, suddenly, his phone and his fitness tracker were both just turned back on. Which again, it's like you're trying to be smart and you're almost there, but not quite. You have a little way to go and maybe you could have outsmarted everybody, but you're not quite there, thank God, but you know what I mean? Now this wasn't it. Tim also called the boys' school on February 23rd around 11:30 a.m. So this was about 4 hours before Becky's body was found. He told the school secretary to not let the boys walk home to Becky's house after school and that she was going to pick them up instead. Which I will say, props to him for doing that, even though it was obviously dumb in his grand scheme of things. I mean, I am happy at the fact that he didn't want his children walking into that scene and seeing their dead mother. So, I mean, If anybody's getting bonus points for anything, I'll throw them there. I'll throw him, a Hail Mary there. So that same day, he was also seen by Becky's neighbor taking a Little Tykes basketball hoop from Becky's home. And it was almost like he was preparing to have full custody of the boys. He made sure that the boys wouldn't be the ones to discover her body. He lied that she was going to pick them up from school and then seemingly set up Becky's father to be the one to discover her, which how sick is that? And he even helped herself to the toys that she had for her children, the toys that he thought that his boys might still want to have when they were living with him full time, which was clearly his intention. And then it goes even a step further, because then the investigators discovered that Tim had created a fake Facebook account under the name John Smith. Real original. Now, this John Smith account messaged somebody on Facebook Marketplace about buying a bike, and specifically, it was a blue Schwinn bike that didn't have any reflectors on it. So police interviewed this person that John Smith bought this bike from, and the seller gave a physical description of the buyer that perfectly matched Tim. He was a tall white man, had facial hair, and long brown hair. And then the police actually even found the bike. It was discarded in the bushes about a half block away from Tim's home. So yeah, another example of where Tim did an absolutely terrible job of covering his tracks. So all of the evidence was pointing right at him. The only question left was about motive, the question of why he did it. Well, as it turned out, Becky had been killed exactly 1 week before she and Tim were going to have to go to court and talk to a judge about their divorce. So the police thought that this was why he killed her. He knew that he wasn't going to be happy with whatever setup the judge would come up with. Because remember, he had been asking Becky for 60% custody and no child support. And I would imagine he had to know that he wasn't going to get that. Plus, keep in mind that Becky was still recovering from her surgery. So Tim probably thought that she would be more vulnerable, have a harder time defending herself. So he seized that opportunity. He would also know exactly what window to break into because he knew that the boys weren't going to be home that night because they were staying with him. And then once he was inside, he went straight to Becky's bedroom because, of course, he knew which bedroom belonged to her. So it really did seem like Tim took his opportunity and ran with it. The means, the motive, the opportunity. And what's wild is that he might have been thinking about all of this, planning it for quite some time, which is something that I'm basing on some absolutely insane videos that came out after the investigation wrapped up. These videos are unnerving, to say the least. This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Now, let's be honest, the holidays are a marathon. I mean, between family gatherings, hosting, endless travel, it is so easy to forget to take care of yourself. For me, I'll be running around prepping everything for guests, and then I realize, wait, I haven't had a sip of water in literally hours. And that is why I keep Liquid IV on hand. Whether I'm hosting, running errands, or even just trying to stay up and keep up with all the holiday chaos, it helps me stay hydrated and feel my best. I love how easy Liquid IV is to use too. You just tear it and pour it into 16 ounces of water and then mix. One stick hydrates you better than water alone, with 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink and 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. Plus, there's no artificial sweeteners and it's non-GMO, it's vegan and gluten-free. I'm obsessed with their lemon lime and pina colada flavors, but lately I've also been trying their sugar-free line, the raspberry melon and white peach. They are so good. So I'll throw a couple of packets in my bag when I'm traveling or just keep them in my kitchen any time during the holiday while I'm hosting. It's honestly been a game changer. It also helps you for those mornings that you wake up and you're not feeling so hot after the holiday parties, wink wink if you catch my drift. Liquid IV is scientifically formulated with LIV Hydroscience, so it's to better hydrate you better than water alone. It's got an optimized ratio of electrolytes and vitamins that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. So stay hydrated through the holidays with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order when you go to liquidiv.com and use code AE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code AE at liquidiv.com. So before I get into the videos, I do want to say that on March 13th, 2023, Tim was arrested near his home and he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion. He was denied bail and he pleaded not guilty. Becky's friends and family were not at all shocked that Tim was arrested. However, Tim's friends were very shocked by this. They all said that Tim was a happy-go-lucky guy. He had coached his son's football team. He was always having fun. I mean, he even did community theater and made corny dad jokes on TikTok.
I once got attacked by a whole gang of mimes.
They did some really unspeakable things to me. So at a party, my girlfriend told me to stop being an idiot. Just be yourself. I looked at her and said, "You better make up your mind." Why did the Mexican man take anxiety medication? I'll wait. Think about it. Nothing? To help with Hispanic attacks. You're welcome.
But that's not what most people think of when you bring up Tim's online presence. See, after he was arrested, a video surfaced of him that made national news. Tim had appeared on an episode of Family Feud in 2019.
This morning, a local man and his family will be featured on Family Feud this week. Tim Bliefnick.
My name is Ted Bliefnick. To my right, I've got my...
And some of his family members traveled to L.A. to be one of the featured families on the popular game show, aired weekdays right here on KHQA ABC. He says appearing on Family Feud was a complete thrill, and he cannot wait for the show to air. When asked about host Steve Harvey, one of his brothers had a cool interaction with Harvey.
His suit line is very nice. He has a bunch of different ones that he wears for every episode, even though they tape several in a row. And so if he finds a snazzy dresser when people really want to dress to impress to be on the show, like he relates to that and he likes to comment on it. You know, my older brother had this white and floral sport coat, and so that immediately drew Steve's eye. And then my younger brother had blue suede shoes on, and so they got kind of into a commentary thing, which was kind of neat.
Kind of neat to see if it makes the final cut, I guess, of the show. Now, Tim goes on to say that he is kind of nervous about watching the show as he hasn't seen anything yet.
Becky was not involved in this show. However, during the episode, Tim gave a very interesting answer to the question, "What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?"
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
Tim claimed that he was just joking. However, considering what happened years later, people started to wonder whether this really was a joke or whether it revealed how he truly felt about his marriage. Was it just foreshadowing what would happen years later? Many people think so, but let me know what you think. People also noticed the stark difference between his appearance in the Family Feud clip and his appearance in his mugshot. Because in the Family Feud clip, his face was shaved, his hair was neat, it was cut short, but now he had like this scraggly facial hair, his hair was long, it was greasy, and he just kind of like looked unkept. Becky's friends and family said that Tim's physical appearance was a reflection of his mental state, that he was spiraling and just completely let himself go. But Tim said that he was growing out his hair so that he could donate it to cancer patients. Tim's trial began in May of 2023, and his lawyer, who had also coincidentally been his divorce lawyer, claimed that the evidence did not prove that Tim had murdered Becky.
The state's theory in this matter is that Tim left his 5-year-old, his 10-year-old, and his 12-year-old home alone in the middle of the night. He rode a bike from 16th in Hampshire to 24th in Kentucky Road. He shimmied up the side of his house and broke in using his crowbar. He walked in through the window, left a footprint on the floor, kicked down Becky's door and shot her 14 times, and then rode that bike back home. That's essentially what the state is wanting you to believe happened in this matter. But let's talk a little bit more about what the evidence actually is and what it shows and what it will not show. I want to talk about the bike. The bike was found somewhere around 18th Street abandoned. The state believes that that was the bike that was used in the commission of this crime. They believed in it so much that they took the handlebars off of that bike and they sent it to the Illinois State Crime Lab. And the reason that they did that was so that they could try to find DNA, fingerprints, something to link that bike to Tim. You will hear from the lab experts that did the testing on that bike, and you will not hear any evidence that there's any trace of his DNA or his fingerprints on that bike. You will also hear and you will see a lot of surveillance video, and you'll hear about the lengths that Quincy Police Department went to find viable, useful surveillance video in this matter in hopes that they could find the perpetrator of this crime somewhere between his house and her house. Now, they did find some video of somebody going somewhere, but that's all the video shows. You don't know if this is a man or a woman. You don't know if they're young or they're old. We don't know what race they are. We don't know how tall they are. We don't know how much they weigh. We don't know what colors they were wearing. We don't know where they were coming from. We don't know where we were going. Heck, we don't even know if this is the same person on each of these videos that you are going to see. The person on these videos is not identifiable by any characteristics whatsoever. And what I assert to you is that in order for you to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Tim killed his wife, as the state has said, then you are going to have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that that is Tim on that bike. Now, you are the ones that are going to ultimately make that decision. But what I am telling you right now, what the state told you in their opening statement, and they've admitted it, you cannot tell who was on that bike, let alone with any degree of certainty say that it was Tim. Shimmied up the side of the house, used a crowbar to open the window. Now, during the course of the investigation, Quincy Police Department took a multi-tool and a crowbar from Tim's possession. I'll give them that. He did have that. I think during one of the searches, he actually told the police where the multi-tool was. But they were so certain that this crowbar was used in the commission of the crime, and so certain that this multi-tool was used in the commission of the crime, that they sent it to the crime lab for further testing to try to identify the tool marks and match the tool to the marks, because arguably, the tool that left the marks is the tool that was used to open the window. They tested the multi-tool. The multi-tool was excluded completely being used in the commission of this crime. They tested the crowbar. The crowbar is inconclusive, folks. They cannot say with any reasonable degree of certainty or scientific certainty that that crowbar opened that window. If that isn't enough reasonable doubt for you, I'll keep going. The state's further theory is that the perpetrator of this crime broke open the window, stepped down onto a side table, and then left a footprint on the carpet. They were so certain about this footprint that they cut it out of the carpet and they sent it to the crime lab. They took no less than 6 pairs of Tim's shoes during the execution of their search warrants, presumably thinking that if Tim did this, certainly whoever left that footprint did the crime. You link the footprint to Tim, case closed, job done. Well, you will hear about the testing that was done on that footprint, and you will hear that none of the shoes that were taken from Tim or anybody else in this matter can be linked to making that footprint. So we cannot say, the state cannot say, the crime lab cannot say with any reasonable degree of certainty that that footprint was made by Tim or any of Tim's shoes. Now, I suspect that you will also hear about one other individual who QPD took a picture of his shoe. I don't expect that you will hear any evidence that that person's shoe was ever analyzed. But that's for another day. Mr. Jones also talked about the Aldi bags that were found at the crime scene. Now, during the course of the investigation, nearly 800 tons of garbage was gone through. Ponds were searched, waste lagoons were searched, trailer parks were searched, wooded areas were searched. Nothing was found that could link those Aldi bags to Tim. They were so certain that those pieces of plastic were so important that they also sent those pieces of plastic to the state crime lab, and they cannot match the pieces of plastic that were found at the crime scene to the Aldi bags that were found at Tim's house. Again, reasonable doubt. It may not seem like a big deal if you look at it on its own, but if you look at the big picture here, folks, the evidence will not show proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Tim committed this crime. They have a great theory. I'll give that to them. The theory is great, the motive is there.
Later in the trial, his defense team claimed that they couldn't even prove that the DNA from underneath Becky's fingernails belonged to Tim. It was a partial match for Tim, but it could have also matched any of their kids since they also shared DNA. The argument was that Becky might have been playing with one of the kids and then accidentally scratched them earlier that day, and that it really even had nothing to do with the murder at all. They also argued that nobody knew exactly when Tim made all of those Google searches. You know, the ones about how to wash off gun residue, how to make a pistol silencer, and so on. They said that the searches didn't have an exact time or date linked to them, so he could have made them years ago, or even after Becky had died, almost like he heard the news and then did his own research trying to understand how this could have happened to her. Which, let me just say, I get that everybody needs to put up a defense, but this is probably a perfect example of why you don't hire a divorce attorney to handle a murder trial. They might be schooled well in divorce and alimony and child support and custody, but schooled in how to defend you from murder? Probably not. Especially if they're going as far as to argue, hey, even if he made those searches, it doesn't matter when. I mean, I get it. Any defense is a defense and you need a defense, but like, give me a break. Now remember, this lawyer, this divorce now murder lawyer, also knew Becky. She knew Becky personally, or at least had known her before the murder. So at one point during the trial, she said that Tim had never physically abused Becky. She said she never saw any bruises on Becky or anything to ever indicate that he would hurt her or would ever want to hurt her. She also said that none of Becky's friends even heard her say that Tim was abusing her. So her argument was that if he wasn't physically hitting her, then he wouldn't just jump to murder with no stops in between, which there are so many things wrong with this point. Don't even get me started on it. I mean, first, it wasn't like she could see every square inch of Becky's body, right? Second, we have seen time and time again where men don't physically hurt their wives, but still end up murdering them. There isn't a rule book saying that it has to be an escalation over time. I mean, give me a break. But again, stick to divorce, ladies. Stick to divorce. The prosecution, of course, shut that down immediately. They said it was just way too coincidental that Tim would own that exact type of gun that Becky was shot with, which was a 9mm, that he would have those searches, that some of his DNA that matched his would be underneath her nails, that he would buy a bike with no reflectors, that he would make the searches. I mean, all of those things. Like, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a mother effing duck, right? And in fact, Becky had actually given that gun to Tim years earlier. During the divorce proceedings, Tim was ordered to give the gun back to Becky too. He said that he didn't want to give it to her in person though, so Tim had asked the police department to do it for him. The police refused, so Tim never even returned it. In fact, it was still inside his home when the police searched his home after the murder. The trial lasted 6 days, and it ended on May 31st. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, and they ended up finding Tim guilty of all of the charges. During his sentencing hearing, Becky's mother read a victim impact statement, and so did her sister. In the statement, her sister includes a very lengthy discussion of how the murder has impacted and will impact Becky and Tim's sons. Not just the trauma of losing their mother so violently, but also the way that they'll never be able to live as anything other than the sons of a murderer, and how because of that they're going to be judged, they're going to be bullied solely because of who they are related to. She says that Tim couldn't possibly love his children and then do something like this to them, which I wholeheartedly agree. I think if you are selfish enough to kill the parent of one of your children, then you don't love your children, because you are leaving them not only without one parent, but if you get caught, without two. I don't believe that that is selfless and that you love your children. That's my personal belief. Now, the judge ended up sentencing Tim to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But it did not end there.
Mr. Bliefnick, you researched this murder. You planned this murder. You practiced this murder. You broke into her house and you shot her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times. I don't know how long it took you to do that. Some of those shots were fired while she was lying on the ground. And you did all of that while your children were upstairs at your house, lying snug in their beds. The court believes that the appropriate sentence for each of the 2 counts of first-degree murder would be natural life in prison. Court believes that the third count of home invasion, appropriate sentence is life in prison. Those three sentences will merge together into one life sentence.
Just earlier this year, in April of 2024, Tim appealed his conviction. The appeal mostly rests on the fact that a lot of the evidence included in the trial should not have been included, like the crowbar, the Google searches, things like that. The appeal also claims that the judge was biased because of his relationship with the prosecuting attorney.
Now that Bliefnick's attorneys have started the appeal process for his conviction, defense attorney Casey Schnock, who represented Tim in the 2023 murder trial, applauds the 50-page brief and thinks Bliefnick may have a chance for a new trial. When Casey Schnock received the brief from appellate defenders Catherine Hart and James Waller, she says it was the best brief she has read in her practice of law.
It was interesting to see how it all came together the way that it did. I was very impressive and very creative, and I'm really interested to see in what the court does with it.
Schnock was a defense attorney for Tim Bliefnick back in 2023. Bliefnick was convicted of murdering his estranged wife Becky Bliefnick, sentencing him to natural life in prison. With a guilty verdict, Schnock says she and Bliefnick were always going to appeal. The appeal that was filed on April 4th details 3 issues with the Bliefnick murder trial: inadmissible evidence from Becky's family and friends, errors in the closing statement from prosecutor Josh Jones, and potential issues with bias from the presiding judge, Robert Adrian. Schnock says her biggest issue was the sealing and filing of a document by Adrian. The document stated that the Judicial Inquiry Board filed a 3-count complaint against Adrian, which dated back to 60 days before Bliefnick was indicted and nearly 90 days before he was sentenced. She says with this document, the entire trial changed.
That was something that we tried to avoid from the very beginning, was this purported conflict between, Judge Adrian and Josh and the whole Jib investigation and proceedings.
Schnock says that with the brief, she is confident Tim can get his wish.
This was not a cookie cutter brief, and given the issues that were raised in conjunction with the Jib commentary, he's got a great shot in my opinion.
Tim has since appeared on an episode of 48 Hours where he totally maintains his innocence, and he specifically addresses that answer that he gave on Family Feud.
The idea of murdering someone, let alone the mother of my kids, is not any part of who I am.
So I'm going to ask you about the Family Feud.
Yeah.
What exactly was the question and what was your answer?
I knew this was going to be asked. The question was, what is the number one regret that people have from their wedding day? I was thinking of what's a common answer, and the first thing that popped into my head was the divorce rate being so high.
And you said?
I said, saying I do.
Did you have any regrets after that?
After saying it?
Yeah.
No, because it wasn't said with any malice or bad intentions. It was supposed to be funny.
How did Becky feel about it, though, when she heard it?
She laughed about it, too, because right after, Steve Harvey looked at me like, oh, you're going to be in trouble. And I even said that. And I said, hey, it's not me. I love my wife. And I looked right at the camera and said, I love my wife, and looked at the camera and said, hi, honey, I love you. It was supposed to be humorous. It wasn't supposed to be anything other than that.
And it would never have even been remembered if what happened to Becky hadn't happened to Becky.
So we have to see how all of this plays out, because it's not technically fully resolved yet. As for Becky's family, they blamed not just Tim, but also the justice system as a whole. It let Becky down. She tried to get a protection order against Tim. She tried to explain that he was dangerous, but since she didn't have any physical marks on her body, they just didn't take her seriously. And unfortunately, we've all seen that way too many times. So where is this going to end up? What's going to happen with Tim? What do you think the truth is? I think the writing is on the wall. I think this is the guy. I think they got their guy. They have the evidence. The Google history never lies. I mean, maybe you could have been Googling it after the fact, but I highly doubt it. Why would you need to Google response times? Why would you need to Google if your fitness tracker can track you and then coincidentally you're not wearing your fitness tracker when you're casing the house? The math does not math. So I'm interested, though, to know what you think. Do you think that there is enough reasonable doubt? Do you think that he has any legs with his appeal, saying that evidence should not have been admitted? And what are your thoughts? I mean, I hate to say it because this is the tagline that I've been saying so frequently lately, but just get a divorce. You now are taking away the mother of your children. Now they don't have their father either. All because what? Because you were jealous that she had moved on, because you didn't want to split custody, because you didn't want to give her alimony. Just get a divorce, pay the money, do whatever it is. Like, you are such a moron. And I just don't get it. Like, why people jump to murder thinking that that is going to be their solution. It blows my mind. Some people, yes, do get away with it. There's no doubt in my mind. But when you have children, you're upping the stakes entirely. Not saying that if you don't have children, you're not doing something horrific. Obviously you are. But like, if you have kids, you are upping the stakes tremendously, because not only are you leaving them without a parent, but you're also risking that they will have no parents. So for you, and the reason I'm saying that is because I'm just trying to put myself in Tim's shoes for a moment. If you ever as a spouse or a partner think, I love my kids so much, I want them 100% of the time, I also don't want to pay my bitch ex any money for this divorce, I just want to be with my kids, I love them so much, you're not doing them any help. You're doing them a disservice, because you're taking away their parent and you're risking being torn away from them yourself, the ones you're saying you're committing this murder for in turn. It just makes no sense. Makes no sense, which is why, to me, I don't think that he truly loves his kids. Maybe a little bit, but not enough, clearly. Obviously not enough. I'm rambling now, so I should probably just shut up. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning into another episode today. I will be back on the mic with you on Thursday with everything going on this week in true crime, headlines, updates, news, everything. So make sure to tune in for that. If you're not following the podcast yet already, it's totally free. It takes 2 seconds. Just open whatever app you're on, find the follow button, and that way, anytime I post new episodes or bonus episodes that I drop in secret outside of the regular release schedule, you will be notified about them and you won't miss them. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And until the next one, stay safe, don't join any cults, be nice and don't kill people, and just get a divorce. All right, bye, guys.